Hi, this is Carrie Brownstein.
This is DJ Premier.
This is Darren Aronofsky.
You got the RZA right here.
Rose McGowan.
Radiohead.
Aisha Tyler.
Tribe Called Quest.
Fred Armisen.
Prince Paul.
Javier Munoz. Seth Meyers.
Frankie Cosmos.
Flying Lotus.
Hi, we're Chaim, and you're listening to the Talkhouse Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Talkhouse Podcast. I'm Josh Modell. On this week's episode, we've got the Scottish singer and songwriter behind some of the catchiest songs of the past 2 decades, along with the super producer who helped bring those songs into the world, Fran Healy and Nigel Godrich. Healy is the singer, guitarist, and chief songwriter of the band Travis, which broke big with 1999's The Man Who, scoring mainstream hits with songs like Why Does It Always Rain on Me and Turn. They've since created a deep catalog that now numbers 9 albums. But for today's purposes, we're going to concentrate on 2001's The Invisible Band, which Travis is giving a belated 20th birthday celebration for at the moment, including a U.S. tour that starts this week. It can be difficult to follow up a massive success like The Man Who, and Travis turned again to Godrich to help them chart the proper course. It wasn't the beginning, but rather the continuation of a long and fruitful band-producer relationship. Check out a little bit of Sing from The Invisible Band.
So crazy lately, nothing seems to be going right. So low, why'd you have to get so low? You're so, you've been waiting in the sun too long. But if you see.
Now, Godrich, by the time Invisible Band came around, had already found massive success as the producer of Radiohead's OK Computer, and of course he would go on to be the sort of unofficial 6th member of that band, recording all of their albums post OK Computer, and even playing music with Thom Yorke in the band Atoms for Peace. As you'll hear in this conversation, Godrich had some solid advice for Healy heading into the Invisible Band, though it's not necessarily advice he would give anymore. Beyond his work with Radiohead and Travis, Godrich has also produced classics by Beck, including Mutations and Sea Change, plus Air and Arcade Fire and Roger Waters. The list goes on. In this chat, the 2 old friends talk about their state of mind and state of life back when they commenced recording The Invisible Band in Los Angeles. They talk about Godrich's recent revelatory experience seeing the Pavement reunion tour. He also produced that band's swan song, Terror Twilight. There's even a story in here about a baby goat peeing in a very expensive guitar case. Enjoy.
Hi, Nigel.
Hey, man.
I love you.
I love you too.
So is this the podcast? This is a fucking great podcast.
This is the podcast. This is it. So what else? You go next. I saw Pavement last night. And they are like the Beatles of indie rock. You know what I mean? They are the greatest band. It was like, it's such a great show because it's just all the songs, all the songs are so great. And I, got to see Steve properly, which was really cool. Got to see all of them. It was it was lovely. I mean, it was really, really lovely. Quite moving because they're just so happy to be doing it, and even I think Steve seems happy too. And in the crowd are fucking nuts for it, and they're also very young.
I know
the crowd, which is what I really loved.
That's fucking great, man. Yeah, they were great. They are the fucking Beatles of,
and it's like a sort of greatest hit. They really sort of every tune. You're like, oh my god, I'm so happy to hear this. Oh my god, I'm so happy to hear this. And they played everything, and they did it all right, and it was great.
It's like you take a classic song where you recognize lyrics, and then you put it through this weird decoder that just sort of scrambles everything. Then you get a Pavement song, and you think at the time, when you listen to it, you think at the time, what? Lip gloss on watery clay. Like, what a lyric, right? So,
relationships,
hey. You kiss like a rock. Like, you kiss like a rock. No, but it's amazing. You think it's so abstract and so, but he's got the melodies, and then suddenly you go and see them 20 years later, and it's like, these songs have just sort of, they've it's like you pull them out of the oven. It's like they've risen.
It's funny. I was just saying how everything currently. I think we're living in an era of retrospective. Basically, everything is backwards looking. It really does feel like that at the moment. And even like the Pavement show, whatever. It's like that last record was made at the same time as The Man Who. Literally at the same time. I was with them and I was with you, and we were like, that's how you guys kind of met and everything. It's like old family photos, and you take a picture and you're like, oh God, I look fucking terrible in that. And then 25 years later, they gain this sort of value. As the older they get, the kind of more sort of, important documents they are. And those, the Pavement songs are just amazing. I mean, the thing is, Steve is an amazing songwriter. He's a pop writer, and he can get away with things because it's Pavement, and he just sort of, in a way, sort of hides behind the kind of sloppiness, really. But nothing seems cheesy, but it's very, very, very kind of chiseled and arranged, and the arrangements are really fucking tight, actually.
Yeah.
So I don't know if he would agree with that, but that's my subjective view of watching them play, Gold Sounds and Cut Your Hair and Trigger Cut, and there's just so many fucking great little pop songs, basically.
Yeah.
And then they had some fantastic long form wig outs as well that were just it was just great, just the whole thing, because they had that whole span over their career. And actually, it's like one of those bands like the Beatles where it's sort of quite sort of it's like 8 albums or 7 albums or something, even less probably. So as usual, I got in at the end of it. So the Invisible Band.
The Invisible Band.
Actually, so you start. I don't remember any of it, actually.
I
do remember everything. I remember all of it. So be warned.
There are standout moments and good bits and bad bits, but let's just talk about the good bits. The good bits I remember are all the social parts of it. There was a pendulum that swung, we went into the studio at round about 10 to midday, was it midday?
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
And then the pendulum would swing across to the other side, which was nightlife and going to the Bar Marmont and just chilling out and having a laugh and going for dinner and just having fun. At this lovely point in everyone's lives where none of us had children. We were, Travis would just fucking going mental bananas with The Man Who. You're mental bananas with your thing. I remember I was walking out on that first day and you just being very, very frank with me and saying look mate, there's no point in fucking going in here and just we have to make it better than the last record. It has to be better than the last record. It has to sound better than the last record. And in every department be better than. And I felt quite confident because I knew we had a couple of good songs in my back pocket. And the other thing you said before we went into the studio was, don't make demos, Franny. Let's keep that for the studio. Just have it on the guitar, because then we're all surprised by what we come up with. Is there a reason why you said that? Apart from the obvious.
Well, all of these sort of retrospective things are interesting because we're talking about something like 23 years ago, really, is what we're talking about at the start of it, where in the last 23 years, I've, done a lot of stuff and my feelings have changed. And you're telling me about a person I was 23 years ago and what I told you and what I told you to do, which I can remember why I thought that, but I don't necessarily agree with it anymore. I think actually what happened in those intervening 23 years is I spent too long in a recording studio with people without any songs, trying to write songs in the studio, which I think is actually it's a lot of time wasted. And the best I'm realizing with perspective. Yeah, I did. I'm just explaining that with perspective, I understand now that it's the best stuff. It's better when you have a song that you've written and you can and I guess what I was trying to say was you have to be able to sit down and play it on a guitar first.
Yeah, that's what you have the song, but don't have it all demoed up and
the first album, you'd done demos, and the demos were quite sophisticated, and I think that they kind of curtailed an aspect of creativity slightly, just in the way that it's like doing demos means get the arrangement down with basic instrumentation and everything's there and whatever. It's quite funny as a producer. Sometimes you get sent demos that just sound finished. I mean, they sound like finished productions, and it's even though you might say, well, I don't think this is the best production for this song, and that's why someone has sent you a demo to kind of discuss about how you would do it differently. The fact that it's realized in a certain form kind of puts the kind of handcuffs on. So it's like you've heard it that way and you'll never unhear it, So I think I was probably trying to stop that from happening in this process, because you're hitting the ground running and you'd been on tour and you'd been playing stuff, and I knew you had new songs, and we had sort of recordings of them in soundcheck and stuff like that. So, that was the kind of bare bones of it. And there was a lot of other stuff that needed to happen. And obviously I think that what happened was, and what I remember happening was, we did an initial stint in LA because I'd been doing so much work there and it worked so well. I thought that it would be a great way to get everybody away and get everyone together in a different place and have an adventure, and you would feed off of that adventure, and we did do that for a while, and then we actually ran out of songs. So we went back to London to work again, and then what happened was you got sent back to LA to write more on your own, and we joined you afterwards. That's what I remember. So it was like a little, addendum, because it had worked so well that going back to reality, you go to Oz for a bit, and it's like, wow, this is amazing. And that's the social aspect. I mean, I think the other thing, when I did those little liner notes for this reissue, I sat and listened to the record, which I hadn't done for a long, long time.
Yeah, me too.
I got like a perspective that I hadn't had for a while, which I never had. And what I could hear was like a bunch of people, like young people who were sort of growing. I could hear the sort of joy and discovery of life. That was what was charming about it. It was like, maybe it just could superficially for me reminded me of that time. We were just, pretty much kind of living the fruits of our labors and getting to a point where we were free to do all these things that were very exciting. And to be able to go to another country and work in a place like that, it was very exciting. And we made a lot of friends on that record, and we had a lot of fun, doing it, which comes through, I think.
Yeah.
I feel older now.
Do you know what it is, man? I think it's having kids.
But I only just had kids.
Yeah, I know. But if you get the flu, you can only just get the flu, but you still feel it. It hits you like a fucking, it's like a massive change in temperature or a massive change in life. Where your mind is spring-loaded to just spring into doing the thing that you're doing now, and I've been doing for the last 16 years. Before that, you were fathering, you were birthing, you were doula, you were like a fucking song doula. You were like birthing these things into the world that went out. And I mean, every night we go out and we play them. And I'm still to this day just bowled over by the what songs do to people. It's like a fucking it's a cure. It's something magic going on. Something, I'm sure in about 1,000 years some physicists will figure out.
Yeah, I believe they'll never work it out.
Yeah,
but that's in a great way. I'm happy. I feel like there's no sort of advancing technology that's ever gonna. I mean, it's been claimed many times, hasn't it? It's like, oh, we've invented an algorithm that can write songs. It's like, well, not quite. Actually, music is a good sort of illustration of how little we know about how our brains work. We can claim to sort of use the words artificial intelligence, which I think is a big misnomer. But the truth is, people don't really understand why music affects us emotionally the way that it does, and people don't really understand why we have emotions, and that's what makes us who we are. And music as an art form is so intangible and weird, and it's sort of divine, isn't it? It's just and that's the thing you're talking about, is when you watch somebody being affected by song specifically, like words and melodies and rhythm and stuff, it's really, you can't bottle it, I mean, we've learned how to record. We learned how to sort of record it in inverted commas. That thing in itself has been like this cause of this crazy sort of blip in human development, which ultimately is the story of rock and roll.
When you say bottle it, it's the word it. Like, what the fuck is it? And it's the thing. It's the mystery. It's the thing that you'll never let you say. You'll never ever know. You'll never ever work out. You'll never ever find it. In a sense, songs are the closest maybe that we've come to bottling it in some way, that you can like carry it around like a flame, like that film Quest for Fire, like when they're running around with a flame. That's and you pass it on to everyone else. It's like,
say that the analogy of bottling it is making an album, managing to kind of capture this thing and then it's like, here, you can pass it to someone else, you can communicate it to somebody else, and it's reproducible. I just had discovered this amazing situation at this particular studio in Los Angeles where I'd worked with Beck, and I knew Mutations, which I knew was just like a fertile ground, and I just thought, I know that Fran would be up for doing this here. So that's why I was like, let's go. Honestly, just trust me. Let's go to this place.
That room was really interesting. You know, the room where the control room.
Yeah.
Was a very interesting. I remember sitting listening to our favorite songs and favorite albums, whatever, in that room. Like you could hear where they'd cut it. You know, you could hear, and you never heard that before. But that room kind of showed up all those things. So
it's the definition of what a good control room in a studio is, really, like a good listening space, because it showed up. It put things that were good in a bad light, which is great because that means that anything you make will end up looking good outside of that situation. It was a very weird room. It was very small.
Yeah.
We could only just fit in there. But I mean, that sort of added to the vibe, really, you know. But I mean, I remember it just was really fun to be around you guys. It was like a real breath of fresh air. And I sort of really subscribed to the idea of like bands being bands because they're sort of like a little group of people that you want to hang out with, you know what I mean? It's like, you know, whatever you say about the Beatles and their music, they also have this massive facet, which is they're just like a really entertaining, fun group of people that are just you want to be in their gang, you know. And you guys always said that you guys had that in droves, and I thought that was really, really important. If people don't like you, they're not going to listen to what you're saying.
Do you remember going into Studio 8 and Tricky was in it?
How can I ever forget?
So you go in, you remember he had that big, it looked like wallpaper tables set up, and it was just like, there was just about 500 bottles of vitamins on it. He was just taking loads and loads and loads of vitamins, and he was smoking like so much weed. And remember the menu? The guy brought in this menu he's like, and I thought it was just for like food and stuff. I'm like, oh. And I'm like, are you serious? This is weed?
Yeah, big kahuna.
That's right. Yeah, and I think that when we met, when we met Tricky, I think he'd smoked the menu.
Yeah, he'd actually he'd rolled it up and smoked it.
Yeah,
right.
He'd done that thing, you know, when you go into Wendy's and they're like, if you can eat everything on the menu, you win a car or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, I'll have that one and I'll have that one. Give me that one. So that was cool. Just all these little, and remember as well, like the second time we went in, Remy Zero, our friends in Remy Zero were in.
Were they? I don't remember that.
You know what? It was the first session because they went in and we went in at the same time. They were working with Jack Joseph.
Oh, they were mixing. Yeah.
And they weren't mixing. They were recording.
Oh, really?
And we had done, in our 2 weeks that we spent there, I think we were there for 2 weeks. We'd recorded like 5 songs by the end of it. And by the end of it, they were still working on their snare sound at the end of 2 weeks. But they were so frustrated. We were just like drilling through it.
I think it's tough being in a band, you know, it's hard. What I remember about that, what was great about that room as well, was that it was very easy to work very quickly. And the other great thing about working with a band, in inverted commas, is that, you know, for example, when you do a backing track to a song like Sing, you just set everyone up and you play it and it sounds great. It's basically instant, you know? Yeah. So I remember recording that backing track and just like, hearing that. And it's just the kind of most pleasing version of doing the job, really. It's a bit like, you know, especially like how having dragged you halfway across the planet to justify this thing. I'd be like, let's see. And you've got that bit of video, haven't you? I mean, I've seen it of us doing the kind of backwards tubular bell stuff.
Those tubular bells were in the studio for indefinitely. They weren't in for Sing. You brought them in for indefinitely, and then you went, oh wait a minute, because then we revisited Sing on the second session.
I mean, basically, it was sort of the backing track was done, and then it was sort of like one of those things where, you know, it was like sticking the banjo on it. You know, that was like one of the important things. It's a classic thing. But nailing the backing track thing was just really fun with that. And then also, I remember like having a lot of fun recording Dear Diary because it was such a nice. That was a skeleton. You know, that was one of the ones that you wrote in this when you were in LA, and we came and recorded it in the second session. And it was because we should say that, like, you know, what happened was. This is what I remember. We went back to London and we went to Air and we did Pipe Dreams there. It's one of my favorites, that, I think, weirdly. But I think we just sort of were kind of in a bit of a funk because we'd been like, you know, in Technicolor land, and then coming back to England, it was a bit like, oh yeah, English everything. It was a bit of a shicer. So you and I looked at each other and realized we go back to LA. But you went first to write, and you rented a house.
That's right.
And you sat there in this empty house. I came to visit you when I got back, and before we started, you were like sat there like some sort of guru, like half naked, just sat with one pit cushion and a guitar and like a little book, and you just sat there and written these songs, and it was like Dear Diary and Last Train, and I can't remember what else. But anyway, the Dear Diary thing was really nice because it was like a sort of it was very kind of contrived in as much as I had I sort of knew how I wanted it to unfold, and starting with the guitars and like building it up and all these kind of weird sort of sounds. I mean, there's a lot of like little stoner stuff. I mean, not literally style. Like I wasn't stoned because
You didn't do that.
Can't get stoned, but other people may have been. I can't comment. But listening back to it when I did, that time when I hadn't heard it for ages, I sort of felt like there was a bit too much of that. It felt like it sounded like I was stoned when I did it. But anyway, on that particular track, it's quite beautiful, really, like the way it kind of, all these layered things kind of come in, and it was nice. So I remember recording that really well. I remember doing the kind of the sound where there was this grand piano that made this crazy noise when you put your foot on the sustain pedal. It was all the hammers lifting off the strings at once, and it sounded like, well, a sort of weird kind of, I mean, you can hear it on the record. It just sort of like opens up this sustained kind of like almost like a reverb of something. But it's like, because we're working on tape, so we're screwing around. So, slide that down, stuck it on, be not afraid.
I've had the sort of pleasure of knowing a few photographers.
Yeah.
But like photographers, they're so when you're out with a photographer, like just walking around, say in New York, they see they'll go, oh God, look at that. And you'll be like, oh my God, there's like a pigeon on fire. Like, I would never, or
you wouldn't have noticed it. Yeah.
And they have the ability to see their eyes are just somehow, and I don't know what it is, because I'm like, I never see shit like that, but it's all around you.
Yeah.
But I think we tend to, in our own ways, in a sensory way, sleepwalk, whether it's through our ears or through our eyes or our senses. But you as a producer, like for instance, that noise that piano made, you heard that. No one else heard that because you weren't listening for it, but you're like, oh my God. And then that became this huge part of, I mean, this tiny little noise that you hear becomes this huge thing, and imbues the personality of the sound into the song and creates this other thing. It's brilliant.
Well, yeah, that was a very good impression of the sound, by the way, you just made. I always say it's like the difference between a poem and a song is like when words can mean so much, but when you put them with a melody and a note changes at a particular moment, it just like supercharges what's being said, and I think that the same is true for some sort of versions of, sonic tricks, and sometimes when there's a sound that sort of makes you see something whilst a note is changing and a word is being said, it sort of again augments it even further. And that's sort of like, that's the thing. It's like the magic of doing these sort of like weird kind of very visual things. And then it's very visual for me. I think everyone has that synesthesia thing. But people don't really realize it. They're affected by it, but they're not realizing what's going on. But everybody sees things that they hear, and all of our senses are kind of cross-patched. That's why music videos work. It's like, it's good to watch something whilst you're listening to something. So I sort of feel like I kind of search for those things that can just give it a little bit more of a kind of power when there's a corner being turned or something.
Can I ask a completely unrelated question, but just a total train spotter question? In your memory, what, like that thing that you've just described there, in your huge sort of canon of all the work you've ever done, what is there any one particular thing that you've done that you've gone like, oh man, that's fucking yes? There's lyrics that I've written that I'm like, oh my God, that's beautiful. Like for instance, on The Invisible Band, time exists, but just on your wrist, don't panic, moments last, blah, blah, blah. That's a really, I was proud of that. Not proud, it's because it wasn't me that wrote, it just came. So what's your equivalent in your life, not in this album?
Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, there's many things where I'm like, this is, I know that it's really great. I mean, the sort of everything in its right place, scrubbing voice was I'm like, this, that's a good one.
That's great.
I'm like, this is something, I know this is good. I had this idea, I tried it, it worked really well. It sort of did the thing that I was hoping it would do, and I've never heard anything like it before, really, and it fitted the picture, and it just worked really well. And it's like a super fucking, it's like the first thing you heard on that record, so it's like it really sets a tone, Like, I mean, I remember doing The Golden Age, the first song on Sea Change, and just thinking, I mean, that was a day.
Wow.
We did it in a day, and I was like, this is really good. I know it's really good. And there's a lot. I mean, I feel you have to be an enthusiast to be able to make a good judgment about what's the right thing to do. I remember reading or listening to, like, I think it was like Roger Taylor from Queen saying that, the last thing you've done, you think it's the best thing you've done, and you should think it's the best thing you've done. You should be like really enthusiastic about what you're doing at the moment, because otherwise, you can't be like, oh, this isn't as good as the last thing. You've got to get excited. So it's hard to gauge, because I'm always excited about things that I'm doing. I'm always excited. That's how you kind of move forward. But like, I think, you can look back and sort of recognize that there's a few moments, I don't know. I mean, a lot of stuff in Radiohead I'm so proud of, that Daydreaming song, there's like all the sort of loops on that. And Moonshaped Pool is just, it was like, I just felt like just did a really good job.
Yeah.
Came together really well. And, I love that Pavement record I did,
It's like,
it's a good one, but these are all things from like a long time ago.
But this is the weird thing, Nige. You remember this, that we'll die, but when someone hears it,
I'm not gonna.
You might.
Let's just say I'm gonna die.
But when, let's suppose, but the someone could come in, like you said, you saw Pavement at the Roundhouse. And the audience were fresh. It's a fresh audience. It's like young people. And music's a timeless fucking thing, because it's what you hear that song for the first time and you're 16. Like a lot of kids, like I was talking to a friend, and they were like, they heard some song from like 20 years ago and they thought it was a new band.
There's no narrative now. There's no like sort of, there's no Top of the Pops. There's no chart show. It's all really fucking convoluted. And I don't think that that's a good thing, because if they don't know the difference between like a guitar band from now or 20 years ago, I mean, maybe that's like, oh, isn't this cool? But
I think music has a timeless quality to it. And then when you discover a song, you unearth it like like a paleontologist digging up a bone and going, oh my God, and being just as excited as, when Kid A starts, you play it to someone. One of my favorite things is you play something to someone a song that you love, and they've never heard it, and you just watch them as they hear it for the first time. Just like when we played songs in the studio, when people come in, and you just sit, you go, they were like, this is going to be good.
Yeah. But having said all this stuff, I would say when I was a teenager, I was listening to music from 25 years before that. I just listened to Pink Floyd and Hendrix and Zeppelin and the Beatles and the Stones. So that's what I was, So, it is timeless. I do think I'm an old fogey, so I think things are getting more repetitive and homogenized, and
I'd
that's
agree.
just I don't think that's because I'm actually saying I'm an old fogey as a kind of I'm apologizing for something that I'm not sorry about, because I don't really think it's because I'm an old fogey. I do think that things have become more homogenized. By the way, just as an aside, I was watching this BBC documentary series from the 50s. The first time they sort of really had a kind of like face-to-face, like talking heads kind of interview program, and it's called Face to Face. Actually, It was like a big thing that was really weird to sort of sit behind somebody's shoulder and like see them interviewing somebody else. It's great because it has like it has like Victorians on it. So one of like older people. Some of the people that are interviewed are just like really old, like are lived in another 2 centuries ago or whatever. Yeah. And one of the people was on it was Carl Jung, and I was watching Carl Jung like on a chat show basically. And him being sort of like asked all these questions, and they were asking him about being older, because he was like, approaching the end of his life, because obviously he's been around for a long time, asking him about Freud and like, so what's Freud like then, that sort of thing. It was really kind of cool. But then one of the things what he talked about was how we should sort of think about ourselves towards the end of our lives as we're older. Like, should we sort of think about things finitely? He said, absolutely not. You should just carry on assuming that you're going to live forever, because there's no point in doing anything else. That's the healthiest, most kind of logical solution to aging and your own mortality. And I just thought, he's right.
Wow.
I hadn't thought about that. Anyway, there you go. But it is also weird being older and having things sort of thrown at you again, like things that you did 20 years ago. It's odd, because it does make you sort of consider like where you were in your life at the time and how you've changed. And we don't fundamentally change as people, but we sort of go down various rabbit holes, don't we? And a record is a really good example of recognizing where you were at that moment, because I can remember all the decisions I made and remember what it sort of brings a lot of that stuff back. Like maybe other people could look at pictures or look at things they've made in their life or something like that. But just right now, I was just sort of saying to Josh before he was helping the podcast, I was just saying how weird it is, because there does seem to be a kind of culture of retrospect. And I said that to you at the beginning here. It's like everything seems to be backwards looking. So when you're trying to busily just work on what you're doing at the moment, people keep on frigging remind you about stuff you did in the past, which sort of wrong foots you a little bit sometimes. But it's also quite pleasing to go back and listen to something and it being like it's like a seaside postcard from youth.
You do this thing, and as you travel away from it in time, it's like it remains in the past, but it also follows you. It's like, what is it called? Spooky movement at distance or something. What's it called? That Einstein thing?
I don't know. Spooky movement at distance.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of calling the new record.
Yeah,
it's like it's when two things, when you disturb one atom, the other one happens simultaneously.
Yeah,
and it follows you, and yet it stays in the past.
The other thing I should say is that absolutely, and this is a truism, is that once you're done in my line of work, once you finish something, you never listen to it again.
No.
You do it and you move on, and you're only thinking and listening about the thing that you're doing at that time. So then for people to sort of like throw stuff back at you from like 20 years, it is quite sort of like, oh, wow. But it's nice because you really do have perspective for the first time. So you can listen to it and hear what it is. And I'm like, I love those guys. I'm just reminded of it and what a lovely experience it was making it, and what an important time in our lives for all of us it was, and how it was the springboard for a lot of, not change, but like a kind of like the beginning of our lives as adults, really, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we grew a lot in that time. We were in a very kind of eye-opening time.
Yeah.
And now look, you live there, you know.
I live in LA.
Yeah. So, you know, I mean, that's a sort of, I would say that is some sort of like byproduct maybe of some vibration that maybe was started back then. Maybe, I don't know if that's totally true, but you know, there's definitely some part of that, surely.
Well, yeah, it's weird because I sort of lived when I moved near, and you did as well, that area where we're around the studio, sort of near, like 10 minutes away from it. You know, we pitched our tent where we landed. Yeah. And I've sort of 6 years later moved down the hill a little bit and to the out of the hills. But yeah, LA's, God, you know, it's a different city now, of course, and that studio is now a different name. It's not Ocean Way anymore. It's, what's it called now? National? It's
called United, which is what it was called before, actually. It was originally United Recorders, yeah.
Gosh.
But, I mean, it's basically the same. That's what's nice about that room, is it's exactly the same. It's got a lino floor from the 50s, and, you know, it hasn't really changed, so.
Is the, one of the things just that I think folk might be interested in is that particular studio, the microphones, I remember the microphones were like crazy good, you know, like they had such great equipment for recording.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like you had two C12s over the drum. They were the overhead mics for the drum kit. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, I would never do that now.
No.
Terrible idea. But what happened to me anyway is just basically I was very ambitious, and once things started going well for me in my career, I knew that I wanted to work in America. So I sort of made a conscious effort to find a way to do something there. I was being offered a lot of things, and one of the things that came to me was this guy, Jason Faulkner, who is a sort of like singer-songwriter, power pop kind of thing. And he was amazing. I had this amazing experience going off and working with him in New Orleans. And then he was from Los Angeles, so we went and finished in LA. Wow. And it sort of started me on this road, because while I was out there, I met Beck, and we just had a little tryout. And I found myself in that particular room with Beck because we couldn't get into another room that I was trying to get into that I'd worked with Jason. But what had happened was my experience of America generally as a sort of somebody who works in the studio was that I was used to things not working in English studios, equipment not working, and like people being a bit moody, and like it just being like you have to work hard, you know, to get stuff to anyway. And then I got to the States, and literally every piece of gear and every room I went into, it was like the best of the best, and everything you reach for was the best version of that thing that it was. And then I discovered lots of things that I'd never seen before, and bits of equipment and instruments I'd never seen before, and just had this real amazing positive experience working here. And also just the people were just so, I mean, they're so goddamn positive, which was a real factor in everything. That's why I was sort of, it's like I found this thing that nobody knew about, you know. It was so ridiculous. It was like my little secret. I'm like, Franny, we got to go to this place and we should work there. That's why we went out there. And it was sort of, so you probably by osmosis were just feeling the same experience, having the same experience. It's like everything is so taken care of. And, you know, that's the nice thing about LA. I mean, it's still like that. It was a bit more like the music business has changed now, but back then it was like, you know, real culture of quality in studios and stuff.
Remember going in the first week, you were like, right, let's go shopping. And we were like, what? You were like, let's just go and find some music shops and just find some weird shit to play on. And so we went out and we bought all these weird things.
We went to a black market, which is no longer there anymore. And they had this like, you know, these kind of electronic tamboras, which is like boxes that make like drones. And they had like, you know, synthesizers that you can't get anywhere else. You know, like things that I'd sort of seen and knew about, but I'd never actually touched. And, you know, it was great. Just went out and bought a few, just to kind of, because when you're in a studio and you have new equipment, you get a certain kind of amount of like inspiration and mileage out of something. You know, even a piano, you know, can just like make you write a song. You know what I mean? I like a nice piano, you know what I mean? Yeah. So, and certainly like a guitar will make you write in a certain way. So, you know, I was like, let's get a few fun things.
You remember the guitar shop amp? I remember looking and finding the Krumar and all those kind of things in the tambura. But there was one shop and the guy pulls out this almost like perfect guitar case from the 40s or something, puts it on the ground, opens it up and picks out this guitar. And it had this amazing history of being played by, I don't know, like Eddie Cochran or one of these things. And while he's showing us it, he had this little baby goat. Did you remember that? Like the guy had a goat.
A baby goat.
He had a goat as a pet goat in his house, in his shop. And while he was giving us the whole spiel on this, like, he's like, oh, and it was like, I remember it being really expensive. Like it was like a $25,000 guitar. And while he's showing us it, the goat is in the guitar case, which is never been touched. And it just takes the biggest piss in the guitar.
Get the fuck out. I don't remember that. I remember that guy and I remember the shop. All those shops are gone, basically. I mean, eBay destroyed that market, you know, and now there's like, you know, the classic thing. There's like very, very expensive websites that you can buy stuff. I mean, a Jupiter 8's like, it's insane. It's like 30 grand now. Or something.
What?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Go and have a look at Reverb. You won't believe.
Wow.
And then go around, look around your house, what you got in the corners. You might be sitting on a gold mine.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the Talkhouse Podcast, and thanks to Fran Healy and Nigel Godrich for chatting. If you liked what you heard, please follow Talkhouse on your favorite podcasting and social media platforms. This episode was produced by Myron Kaplan, and as always, the Talkhouse theme is composed and performed by The Range. See you next time.